For the final chapter of the helminths, we will cover the cestodes, also known as the tapeworms. First, we will discuss some general characteristics of the cestodes. They usually require intermediate hosts, so our life cycles are getting a little bit more complex here. They are all hermaphroditic, meaning there's male and female reproductive organs within the same organism in each proglottid. The adults are flat ribbon-like structures, and we will spend some time on the anatomy of the tapeworms. They're comprised of a scolex, a neck, and individual segments called proglottids. This is a great picture from your book showing an adult tapeworm. So starting at the top, or what looks to be the head of it, is called the scolex. This is how it attaches to our mucosa. The scolex always has suckers on it. It usually has 4 suckers, but for Diphyllobothrium latum, there's 2 suckers. Some of the parasites have a rostellum, which is a bump on top of the scolex that has hooks on it. So if the rostellum has hooks, it's called an armed rostellum. And if the rostellum does not have hooks, it's an unarmed rostellum. And the hooks just serve as an additional means of attachment. Below the scolex is called the neck, and this is where the proglottids originate. So the proglottids are growing from this area, which means the most immature ones or the freshest ones are located right below the neck, and the most mature ones are located at the end. And they can even break off and be shed in the feces. The word for the entire length of all the proglottids is called the strobila. So the strobila can be even several meters in length for some of our tapeworms. And as I mentioned, the term proglottid means these individual segments. So one proglottid, another one, another one. Each proglottid contains male and female sex organs. So your tapeworms are hermaphroditic. All you need is to ingest one egg to have one adult emerge from that egg, or one larva, excuse me, to have one adult mature from that one larva, and that one adult could mean you're infected with a tapeworm. I've mentioned the term gravid before. Gravid refers to pregnant or egg producing. So this is where, again, where the eggs are being shed from. It's the mature gravid proglottids. So this is much of the same terms again. Your scolex always has suckers. It may or may not have hooks. When it does, we call it an armed rostellum, and it's how it attaches. The neck comes immediately below the scolex, and then we have our proglottids. Unless the scolex is detached by treatment, infection will continue. So treatment is aimed, the drugs are aimed at detaching those suckers from the mucosa because it'll just continue to produce proglottids and grow. It would be very rare. You're not going to see scolices in the feces for diagnostic purposes. What we will see are eggs and even proglottids. There are some new terms for the cestode life cycles, and there's always a larval stage as a means of humans getting infected. So one of those larval stages is called the Cestodes larva. There's a few other terms. There's the cysticercoid larva, and there's also the plerocercoid larva. But this is usually how humans get infected, is ingesting these larval stages. You will never see a larval stage in a diagnostic specimen, but it's how man gets infected usually. The diagnosis is made by eggs and sometimes proglottids in stool. So here's our roadmap. We'll we will be talking about Diphyllobothrium latum, Taenia saginata and Taenia solium, Hymenolopus nana and Hymenolopus diminuta, and Dipollidium caninum. Starting with Diphyllobothrium latum, this is a very complex life cycle, one of the most complex ones we'll talk about. It involves two intermediate hosts, and I pulled this picture from the CDC website because I think it's very nicely laid out, and it's also labeling the infective and diagnostic stages for you. So let's get started down here at the bottom where eggs are passed in feces. So obviously we had a human that was infected, and the human is shedding eggs. We've got a little D here, so this is telling you this is the diagnostic stage for Diphyllobothrium latum. It's seeing eggs and feces. We could also see proglottids in feces, so we'll talk about what those look like also. The eggs have to reach water to mature. So they're unembryonated when passed, and once they reach the water, they get a chance to embryonate. From the egg comes a life cycle stage called the chorocidea that hatches from the egg, and it's ingested by a crustacean, or also called a copepod, which is a very tiny crustacean. Usually it's transparent looking, very tiny. Inside the copepod, the chorocidea would develop into a procercoid larva. Next, so that's the first intermediate host. A second intermediate host will come along, which is the fish, and it will ingest the infected copepod. So inside the fish, that procercoid larva that it ingested will develop into a plerocercoid larva. And here we note that this is the infective stage for man. It's the plerocercoid larva. Now, we could ingest this fish and get infected with the plerocercoid larva, but that's a very tiny fish. So the more common thing to happen is that a bigger fish, a predator fish, comes along, eats that smaller fish, and humans are ingesting this predator fish, the larger fish. But nothing else is happening inside the predator fish. It still has the plerocercoid larva from the smaller fish inside of it. So we're still getting infected either way, whether we ingest this fish or this smaller fish. The infective stage for us is the plerocercoid larva when we eat undercooked or raw infected fish. So we ingest the plerocercoid larva, and the larva will develop into the scolex of the adult tapeworm. And remember, I said Diphyllobothrium latum has two suckers on its scolex, and they're elongated, two sucking grooves. And that's how it's going to attach. Proglottids will grow from it, and we could see shed proglottids in the feces. And they look like this. They're very broadly rectangle. They're wide and skinny, and they have a rosette-shaped uterus, which is this thing in the middle. The following slides are explaining that picture again in words. So let's talk about it again so it helps it to sink in. Eggs get passed in feces. From the egg hatches a life cycle stage called the chorocidum. What comes along and eats the chorocidum? Remember, it's the first intermediate host, which is the copepod. What happens inside the copepod? The chorocidea develops into a procercoid larva. What happens next is that a fish comes along and eats that copepod. That's your second intermediate host. And inside the fish, the procercoid larva develops into the plerocercoid larva. We can ingest that fish or eat a fish that ingested that fish. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Either way, we are ingesting the plerocercoid larva, and that is the infective stage. The scolex will develop and attach to our mucosa, and it can live there, and it can grow very long. It may reach as much as 10 meters in length. Interestingly, there can be no clinical symptoms. So someone can have a tapeworm and they might have mild weight loss or intestinal discomfort, could be subclinical. It doesn't really bother them. However, a more serious thing that can happen is that this parasite competes for vitamin B12 absorption. So if you remember back to hematology, what anemia comes from the inability to absorb vitamin B12 and folic acid? Remember, it's your pernicious anemia. So this isn't exactly pernicious anemia because it doesn't have anything to do with intrinsic factor, but it can mimic a pernicious anemia, which is one of your megaloblastic anemias. So megaloblastic goes in your blank. The diagnoses of Diphyllobothrium latum is eggs in feces or sometimes proglottids in feces. Now, it would be very, 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 very rare to see a Scolex in feces. And if that were to ever happen, it would come directly after aggressive treatment. But it is worth knowing what the Scolex looks like. Remember, it's unique from the other cestodes in that it has two sucking grooves. Usually the other cestodes have four suckers on them. These grooves are long and there's only two of them. So this is your scolex or your head of Diphyllobothrium latum. You have to know what the proglottids look like. They are wider than long, so they're very wide, and they have a rosette or coiled shaped uterus, which is this in the middle. So this is where the eggs are coming from. The egg is very unique because it is the only operculated tapeworm. Remember, which other eggs are operculated? All your flukes are operculated except your blood flukes, and none of your tapeworm eggs are operculated except for Diphyllobothrium latum. There is a small knob at the end opposite the operculum. So this is a good picture because you see the little knob and you see the operculum over here. Now, remember, this looks similar to Paragonimus westermanni, which is your lung fluke. But Paragonimus westermanni has shoulders and it does not have a knob. Diphyllobothrium latum does not have shoulders and it does have a knob. And remember, what's your specimen of choice for diagnosing Paragonimus westermanni? It's sputum, whereas for Diphyllobothrium latum, we're looking at feces. And this is a really cool picture showing the operculum is actually open. Now, you cannot see the knobs in this picture, but in any case, this is Diphyllobothrium latum.